Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I want to apologize for the delay in starting this meeting, and there will be representatives coming in again as they get through with voting. Some bills are in some of the committees right now. They have votes to take. So we want to go ahead and start with a hearing, and we will begin. Let me first, I know I've got three guests who have signed up, but I understand that there's some folks who have come in and signed up to speak at the meeting now. How many, if you've just signed up to speak, raise your hand. I'm just trying to get a count so we can divide time. One? Okay. So, all right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and start. We're first going to hear from Lynn Deerdorf. I think Homegrown Restaurant. Is Lynn here? Okay, I'm sorry. Lynn is with Preserving Now, and I'm sorry, Kevin Clark is with Homegrown. All right. Well, welcome. First of all, I've been by the restaurant, but y'all are only for breakfast and lunch, so we'll try to get back. I know. We're anxious to visit. We've heard great things, so you've got quite a reputation around here. So, but welcome, and if you will, tell us a little bit about your issue with regulations and what you found to be a burden. It is on. If you will, I'm sorry, there is a switch, and I have you on up here.
Yeah.
If you'll hit it, you're good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm Homegrown. Hope to see you there.
Absolutely.
The situation we're having is I have a restaurant that I'm trying to provide people like Lynn who does preserving, and I got another friend who does pickling that want to come in and use my space to start their own little small business. The Department of Health will not allow it, but the Department of Agriculture will. So, we don't know why one will and why the other one won't. I've kind of left it at that. Like I said, Lynn approached me one time, asked if I would allow, and I'm like, sure, because we close at 3 o'clock, so we have plenty of time after that. Someone like Lynn could come in and pursue, a small business, rather than going out and try to find a spot and usually to fund rent just to do that would probably be a little expensive. So we're just trying to find a way that we can make this work, kind of piggyback off my business. And I can use her product plus.
In the restaurant.
Right. So we just kind of hit a roadblock. And Lynn's done some research more on, I think, what's.
Could you elaborate on, obviously you've gotten two different issues, one from the Department of Agriculture, one from Community of Health. So could you elaborate on
Yeah, I have a statement too, if I
Okay.
could.
Yes, please.
That'll help a little bit, but I'll be glad to address questions too.
Absolutely.
After 40 years of home canning and preserving, and after retirement from Starbucks, so I did work in food service as well, I decided last spring to see if I could do this as a small business, preserving organic food products that include fruit butters, pickles, relishes, and condiments that are not currently being offered by Georgia businesses. Interestingly enough, by the way, there's no company that I've been able to find in Georgia that does exclusively organic products. And then, as you probably know, this has really arrived. Its time is really now.
Mm-hmm.
And this will help make us competitive with other products that are out there from other parts of the country. I attended a class in starting a food business at Georgia over at UGA. They have a great school over there to do a lot of these kinds of things. I learned the requirements for food business certifications and that my business is classified as a food sales business. Kevin's is under food service. Restaurants are under food service.
And I'm sorry, yours is again classified?
Food sales.
Sales, okay.
That means packaged with a shelf life, not for immediate consumption. Okay, anything packaged and on a shelf kind of thing. Regulated by the Georgia Department of Agriculture. I worked with my local Georgia Ag, and over a period of several months I've received approval on 6 to 8 products for processing and approval for the labels for these products. There's an extensive certification process that has to go on before you can even get going as a business. In the meantime, I also searched for a kitchen in which to do the processing where my food business could be certified by Georgia Department of Ag. I talked with Kevin at Homegrown, which is very close to where I live. I live in Cabbagetown, right nearby. And I knew that his restaurant closes down in mid-afternoon. Kevin was willing to offer me time in his kitchen, and his facilities met my needs for preserving my food products. I would use his kitchen after hours a couple of days per week for my own small business food processing. I subsequently talked with Georgia Ag, as Kevin mentioned, and they were willing to certify my business at homegrown, but the Fulton County Department of Health said that they would not permit it. I called them. They did agree that they would not allow Georgia Ag agents to certify in restaurants that they certify. And I have the gentleman's name that I talked to, by the way. I want to stress to the committee that this is a facilities issues only, not a matter of sanitary or health regulations. We both have to meet stringent health requirements that are very, very similar. I continue to meet all the standards of the Georgia Department of Ag for food processing within a restaurant kitchen. I also hold a Safe Serve certificate, which is required by both agencies, whether you're Georgia Ag or Department of Health. And I have experience in food service, having worked as a general manager for Starbucks in various locations in Atlanta. I recently found out that restaurants in Fulton County, like Kevin's, will allow the Department of Health will allow a Georgia agent to certify them for processing and preserving in their own kitchen. In other words, if they're serving fresh food, but they also want to go into preserving, they have to be regulated by Georgia Ag for that. The Fulton County Department of Health will allow Georgia Ag in to certify them, but will not allow another business in to be certified. I believe this is hampering us and other small businesses from finding the necessary facilities for food production in Georgia to start up and grow our own businesses. It's very hard to find a facility that Georgia Ag can go in and certify. Kitchens, as you know, may be hard to come by, either because they're in great use, extensive use by the restaurants and other places, catering kitchens and so on, or as Kevin mentioned, renting a kitchen when you're a startup business is extremely prohibitive, and many of us wouldn't need one full-time anyway, so we couldn't afford to pay the full-time rent that it would take in a kitchen. Okay? Do y'all have any questions?
Yes, we do. Vice Chairman Horn.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understood what you just told me. If a restaurant owner wants to prepare food and preserve in their own space, they can do it.
Correct.
But if a restaurant owner wants to allow someone else to preserve in their space, they can't do it?
Yes.
What's the difference?
We don't know. We wish we knew.
Were you given did you ask that question
Yes.
to the person that you spoke
Yes,
to?
I've actually-
Were they able to give you an answer, or did
No.
they just not give you an answer?
They don't have an answer. We just don't do it.
So let me ask you, so they didn't cite a particular regulation, or here's Georgia code where we can't do this, or here's a local ordinance that disallows it. They just simply said you can't do it.
That's correct. I've actually talked to them on three different occasions. The first time last summer, and then not that long ago, probably about a month ago, and then again when I knew I was going to be here. And I've talked to three different people to see if I would get a different story. Nothing.
Does your written testimony include the maybe the inspector or the
Yes.
inspectors?
Yeah, do you have like a
that-
timeline or something like that of who you talked to and when and what you were
I
told
don't
and
have
all
a
that?
timeline, except to say that the first call was last summer when I first was pursuing this. But my call and the inspector's name that's on here was 2 days ago.
Okay.
And his name and phone number, he's in the downtown Fulton County Environmental Services office. His name is, I'll be glad to leave a copy of this with you, by the way.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah. He's an inspector with the department. He's also a supervisor.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that was my question. I was going to ask you if they were citing a rule or a regulation
Yeah.
or a state law that gave them the authority to tell you couldn't do
Right.
it. And
I would
the
love it if
answer's
they
no.
had. The answer is no.
I'll tell you what. I think this committee could probably help you find that answer.
We'd love it. We'd love it.
I've got another question, if you
Absolutely.
don't mind. Representative Braddock, if I know you've got your button.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. So what is the rule surrounding, and you may not know this, but what is the rule surrounding people that make stuff off-site and bring it? Like, I know a lot of restaurants will buy their desserts from someone off-site that prepare it, who knows where. But does this pertain to that too?
I'm not sure where the differentiation is. I know that under food sales, food that is packaged, and it could be bakery items, it could be meat items, it can be dairy items, but food that's packaged, like if I wanted to go sell to Whole Foods, I would have to get regulated through the Department of Ag. That's what they control. They also control processing plants and co-packers, so they control big operations as well as small, like mom and pop and farm processing. They would control what farmers can do as well. I don't know, like a baker who would do it for a restaurant or for immediate consumption. I don't know where that falls, because I don't know whether that's considered packaged or fresh. I haven't gotten into that. But if they fall under the packaged, they would fall under Ag. If they fall under the other, they would fall under Department of Health. Both of them have, whichever way they are, they have to meet food certification requirements. Yes.
Okay. It's not packaged stuff. It would be
If it's fresh, daily made fresh, they might fall under. I'm just guessing. They might fall under Department of Health.
Okay.
But they do fall under one or the other, for sure. There are exemptions that I'm aware of because I asked about it for like farmers and stuff, but there's not for the rest of us that I know of.
This is perplexing.
Yeah.
One, I want to applaud you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I know from a family perspective, a lot of our family and where we're from have the same thing. They do a lot of canning or preserving fresh farm-grown or garden-grown vegetables and a whole host of items. So, one, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
And certainly it could help you, Kevin, in your business, first to rent the facilities and then probably have another product to deliver to your customers as they come in and eat at your restaurant. So, again, that's exactly why this committee is doing what it's doing. Items like this would have never come to our attention unless you
And we
had come
appreciate
forward
you guys
and
too. I was so thrilled when I heard that there was such a committee here. I applaud your efforts for it too, because we're out there trying to find solution to problems, and I'm so glad that there's a place we can come and talk about it. It's I wanted to also add, while we're talking about it, not just helping in tandem with each other and getting businesses growing, and also businesses that may not not exactly existing in a format in Georgia, but we also buy local from farmers, and we support our farmers.
Yeah.
And I know you
Just
guys
the
are
organically
big.
grown.
Exactly. So, I mean, this is all kind of coming full circle to help everybody in the Atlanta area or in Georgia. We buy through the state farmers market a lot of our products. We buy at green markets in order to find the organic. So it's helping that part of the economy as well. So, but thank you.
I tell you what, as chair, I'm going to request that our aide help me draft a letter to the person that's identified in your testimony here, and we'll see if we can't get an answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can I leave this?
Thank y'all. Yeah, absolutely. If you
Okay.
will, leave it with our aide at the end of the aisle there, and we certainly appreciate it.
Thank
And I look
you.
forward to coming in and eating at your restaurant. Thank you. All right. Thank you. David Iwan, Iwan, all right. David, if you will, come and tell us a little bit about yourself and your industry and what regulation you're
Okay, I'm
You're
a
having a
remodeling
problem.
contractor,
all right.
and I've written something here so I can just read it if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thanks for having this so we can talk to you folks. The regulation I have an issue with is a contractor state license that I'm now required to have in order to do my business in Georgia. Having my basic residential license with required insurance and the required continuing education is not in and of itself a big expense, though these small expenses add up and become a drag on any remodeling company. Not having a commercial license has prevented me from doing small commercial work, which I occasionally did, but not enough to justify or sustain the higher level of insurance the state requires me to have. So the bottom line is I lose out on opportunities for work. Another problem that came up last year was being out of work for 2 months. I came close to not being able to keep my insurance up. If I cannot keep my insurance up, then the state will cancel my state license, and then what would I do then? I'm also able to do plumbing and electrical work, but cannot pull a permit for these as I don't have a license. The state has effectively put me in a box as far as doing work legally. I looked to other types of businesses and learned that there are 179 businesses that are required to have a state license, and I asked why. In our U.S. Constitution, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the happiness basically is the moral obligation to be able to feed my family. And this makes me ask the question, what constitutional authority does the state of Georgia have that I have to get their permission to work and feed my family? Being a remodeling contractor, I'm also a problem solver, and I do have a solution, and that would be to make the state licensing optional. If a business wants to advertise that they have a state license and that makes people feel more comfortable using them, great. Word of mouth has always worked well for me, and I do not need a state license to get people to hire me or to treat them fairly and do quality work.
It is a great question. I know we have had several fellow contractors come up with various issues, but one of them has been the license. I know this body, what was it, Mr. Vice Chairman, was it 4 or 5 years ago? The licensing.
It's been about 2 or 3 years.
Is it 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
Was it 3 or 4?
I was grandfathered in,
Okay.
so I didn't have to go through all the testing and all that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I asked Brian Kemp, he came to one of our Tea Party meetings down in Lawrenceville, and I asked him the same question, and he really didn't have an answer.
And I think that may be something we need to go back and revisit. I know that a lot of times the industry, at least what I remember about this, and this is a question I want to ask you, and probably that's why this committee would want to look at this and discuss it, was that sometimes you want to do it as a body. I understood that maybe the licensing process between the local jurisdictions was getting, I guess, convoluted. In other words, if you were doing contracting in one local, say Atlanta, and you wanted to go down to my county, Spalding County or Griffin, that the requirements for being able to get a license there may have been, you're getting honors. In other words, it's not uniform. And that's a question I think we need to go back and revisit. If the purpose of this was for uniformity, such that you didn't have to have a license everywhere you went to go apply your trade or meet different standards in different jurisdictions, that may be a good thing for you and your industry to say, hey, we've got one license, we can do it all. But I certainly am seeing your point of the question that
Right.
there are other things under this licensing that is quite frankly, it's not good.
Well, years ago they had you had to have a business license in each county,
Mhm.
and they made that uniform, so you just had to have one. So that was fine. But this is the state license,
Yeah.
so I have to have the state's permission to be able to work in Georgia.
I just didn't know if it was a preemptive move, so to speak, to make things uniform such that local jurisdictions didn't have different qualifications or.
It's not the qualifications.
Okay.
It's just, every 2 years you have to have it renewed, and they ask you certain questions, and if they don't deem you financially responsible, they won't renew your permit. I mean, you look at the questions that they ask you. I mean, I built a couple homes
Mhm.
at the height of the market, and of course everything crashed, so I declared personal bankruptcy. I tried to avoid it for 2 years. But one of the questions that they asked, have you ever declared bankruptcy? And I said yes, I did. And they weren't going to renew my license, and we're going to have to look at that a little bit closer. And I said, yeah, we're going to have problems if you don't. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff we go through. It's just a leash around my neck to make me jump through hoops.
Well, I think this concern has come up before this committee, and certainly I've heard it outside of this committee regarding that license. And I think it's an appropriate issue that we need to look at and discuss. And I certainly, we don't need to be putting something out there that would hinder somebody from making a living, feeding their family, paying their bills every
Sure.
day. And I appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? All right. Next, we have Keith Brown from America's Home Place in Gainesville. All right, good afternoon, Keith. If you would, tell us a little about yourself and your business and the regulation that is being a thorn in your side.
There's lots of. My name's Keith Brown. I build home builder. I've been building homes my whole life. I'm with America's Home Place, large residential construction company. And I've got several issues. I actually have some notes here if I can hand those
Yes,
out to you guys.
absolutely. You'll give it to the aide, and she will.
Follow along.
Thank you, Caleb.
The first one is the, on my list here is the Georgia Soil and Water Conservation. And I don't have the exact complaint of the last gentleman, but it still touches on that, is we have, the state required first, before the state license ever came into play, you had to have a blue card to move any dirt on a job site. That happened back in 2009. So you got to get this first, and then now a couple years later they came up with a state card. So now you got to have a state card. Got to renew this one every 3 years. Got to renew this one every 2 years. By law, my plumber can't even go on a job site and run a trench to hook up a water line or a sewer line without having a blue card. That means he has to go to a class and read this book, and he has to take a test, and then he has to renew every year just to dig a trench on a job site and have this blue card. Same thing with graders, which I could see that. Anything to do with erosion control. You move dirt on a job site, that means an electrician runs a trench to a well, wants to run a wire underground, he's got to have a blue card. And so then they create a state license after that, and why can't we make a state license, somebody has a state license exempt from having a blue card, and have a few questions on the test, or we have to have education every year to renew our license as well, continuing education, and that could be addressed as well, so that you have some erosion control questions on the information that you have to do to get your license. So that's one issue. And you know, on my list I try to have some points here that I've made here, and I also feel like I don't want to get up here and complain. I feel like that we should have solutions. So one of the solutions I would suggest here, which is my opinion, there may be better solutions or some other solutions, but the one I have is have anybody that has a state license should at least be exempt from having the blue card. It's just we're having two agencies, you know, overseeing the same project. I mean, it's kind of redundant.
A question: the blue card
Yes, sir.
Is it a state law that is requiring it, or is that under regulation that you're required to pass or go through further testing? And
Yeah, this is the Georgia Soil and Water Conservation Card. Most counties, now not all, because every county and jurisdiction is different. They all have different rules, but most of them you go to, you have to show your blue card to get a building permit, and of course you have to show your state license as well. So, and before you had to have a state license, you always had to show your blue card to get a building permit.
who issues the blue card?
Georgia Soil and Water Conservation Commission.
Okay. I think aren't there separate. What I'm hearing is that's a separate. Georgia Soil and Water Conservation is a separate body. I know it's a separate body
Correct.
than the EPD. So
Correct.
I think there could be separate. There are separate regulations.
Correct.
So
Absolutely. That's my
okay.
next one coming up is EPA. You have any other questions on that one, or I'll move on to
well,
the next one?
I want to. I
Okay,
guess
go
my
ahead.
question is it by statute or is it by the Georgia Soil and Water Conservation regulations that you got to have that blue card? And that's what this committee needs to find out, so that we can go back and start looking at: is this a regulation, or is this perhaps perhaps a law that specify that they do something? So
Right.
we can either go back and review the law, or we can go back and say, hey, we passed laws, but it didn't give you the right or the agency to go this far in what you're doing, or
Right.
we may think that you're exceeding the scope of what an original law was intending for you as an agency to do.
And I don't know the answer to that. I just know you have to have one, and you've had to have one for several years to pull a building permit in most counties in the
Okay.
state of Georgia. Yeah.
Well, and before you leave, we may want to not get your personal information off that
That's
card,
fine.
but we may want
It's not that personal.
to to make sure that we understand that card and
All right.
and how it got issued and a
Yeah.
specific name of that card.
Yeah.
All right, continue.
And that's the standard green book. I mean, your engineers and everybody else has to use this green book to
Yeah.
come up with that. Next issue is it's the EPA, which is, the way I understand it, is actually not state, that's federal, correct? I believe.
EPA is federal, the
It's
EPD
federal.
is state.
So the EPA has deemed, I don't know how many years ago, it's been several years now, that the state of Georgia have it's called an MPDES permit for any discharge of any disturbance of over 5 acres, which includes most subdivisions that are developed. Okay, and that was the intent of the permit. And of course, there's lots of other issues I have with the permit to begin with, but the biggest problem we have today is that most of the subdivisions in the state of Georgia, I'd say most, are probably owned by banks these days. Individuals don't own them anymore. So the banks, of course, have not updated or kept updated the MPDES permits. So every time we have an individual that buys a lot in a subdivision, you have to have a primary permittee and a secondary permittee. Well, there's no permittee in these subdivisions, so the local jurisdictions are requiring each individual lot owner to have an MPDES permit, which was never the intent for this permit. It was intended for large developments over 5 acres. When we, build a single-family home, we're disturbing less than half an acre most of the time. So what that entails is, of course, cost to the consumer, cost to our customers trying to build a house, and of course, we don't need any more cost for new home construction right now if we're ever going to get back to building homes again. So what this entails, instead of a customer just taking a site plan that we can draw or our staff can draw and turn into the local jurisdictions, we have to have a full set of plans drawn up by an engineer and turn in for them to get an MPDES permit, which costs usually around $1,500. So it's very expensive and very time consuming. We also not only do we have to wait for the engineer to provide the drawings and pay the money and get all this done, we're trying to start a house for somebody that lives in that would buy a lot in a subdivision from a bank usually. And then, of course, we have to wait 14 days once you send it in to be able to start any work, because that's what the EPA requires. Not that they do anything with those documents. They absolutely do nothing with them, by the way, unless you get into some trouble or there's some issue. They're kind of like the big watchdog up here. So if the local jurisdiction's not doing their job, they can come down and pounce on you, and they've got all their plans and information if they need them. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure it goes in a file because I've never heard back from any of them ever. So that's the big issue right now. It's not the intent of the original permit, number one. And number two, I think the permit in itself was overreaching. Well, Georgia went from as far as erosion control, went from a state that had the least regulations in the entire country to, once they put this in place, we became the state that had the highest, most regulated erosion control.
The Vice Chairman Chairman Horn has a question regarding this issue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me make sure I understand you. I'm somewhat familiar with that NPDES process, but
Okay.
if you have, if you're taking a single lot in a big subdivision, for instance, under development, why are you having to do an NPDES permit if you're not going to turn over 5 acres?
Because there is not one for that subdivision.
Oh, so you're saying you got to do one for each
There
lot
has to
because
be
there isn't one for the whole subdivision?
Yeah, and sometimes we're the only house being built in that subdivision. So, a homeowner buys a house in there. If there's no primary permittee, then you have to become the primary permittee for your particular lot.
Okay, so
Now,
that
not
is
all
that is
counties are
federal.
doing that, but some are. Many are. And that's kind of what's frustrating too. It's all we talk about, the economy and not knowing what's going to happen with taxes, and we don't know what's going to happen to the economy. Well, can you imagine our position? We can't even know what's going to happen from one county to the next, as far as projecting what costs are going to be for our customers in these situations. So,
You pay the $1,500 to the county?
no, that's to the engineer to draw the plans, because you have to have an engineered set of plans. You can't do them yourself.
Well, but how much does the permit cost?
The permit is nothing.
Oh, you don't pay anything
Well,
for
I
the
take
permit.
that back.
I can't believe permitting is a racket. I cannot believe that you're getting a permit and not paying anything for it.
I don't think there's a fee.
Really?
Yeah, that's why I'm telling you.
Wow.
They put the plans in a file, and they really don't do anything with it.
But who is issuing the permit? Is it the state or is it the feds?
MPDES is EPA, so it'd be the feds, but they don't actually issue anything. You just have to send it to them, and you have to prove that you sent it to them. You have to have you have to send it certified. You keep your receipt, and you have to take that receipt to the local jurisdiction to show them that you've applied for that permit. Your application, just applying for it, grants you the permit as long as you don't hear back from them in 14 days. That's how it works.
But the permit has to be accompanied by a set of drawings that are prepared by an engineer at a cost
Correct.
of $1,500.
Correct. Approximately. I mean, it could
Yeah.
range
Could
from
be more, yeah.
$1,200
Could
to
be more. Could be
$1,800,
more.
somewhere in that range, depending
Okay.
on the size of your lot.
Yeah. All right.
And I think there's an engineer in the audience that could confirm that. Is that price about right?
What's that?
About $1,500? Am I about right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So, any questions on that one? I'll move on.
No. Continue, please.
Okay. My next one is stream mitigation. This one's a little passionate for me because I'm actually in the middle of one of these right now. I'm just going to go through the process if you want to get a stream mitigation on your property, which in this case, I'll describe this property a little bit to you. It's about, the main road is about 80 feet higher than my lowest point down where this creek is, or what they call a creek. I call it a drainage way, but we can argue about that. In this situation, there's about 4.5 acres of drainage that comes from other properties, which includes part of DOT's highway, drains on our property. About 4.5 acres of, my engineers figured out, about 4.5 acres of drainage comes onto our property from other properties, not ours. Ours is about a 33-acre site that we're developing for retail and commercial. It's going to be a great asset for the state and the local jurisdiction there that's going to receive, obviously, a lot of sales tax and other benefits. This drainage way is about 288 feet that I'm trying to mitigate. The first step, and I didn't bring it, I brought a lot of other props here, but I didn't bring this one, but the first packet that goes to the Army Corps of Engineers, it's about 1 inch thick, and again, it has to be produced by an engineer and all the environmentalists and companies and everything else to get this produced, to answer all their questions and do all their forms, and that's the first step. Then the next step is the same thing, another inch, about 1 inch thick packet you have to turn into the EPD to get your variance. Once you get that complete, and if everything goes right, by the way, this takes about 6 months, if you don't have any opposition from any river keepers or anybody else. Then EPD, you get to turn in another packet. You get their blessing. Then you get to go do the same thing with your local jurisdiction. Same thing, another big packet, 1 inch thick. Turn it in, have your public hearings. And then when you get done with that, you get to pay credits to the state of somebody who's actually donated their land for conservation. And that's, for this one, it's actually going to cost about $72,000 just to buy the credits so that we can actually fill in this drainage way that somebody deemed a creek. That 4.5, I mean, if you had 4.5 acres of runoff off of other properties, and that continued to run over a period of time, it almost kind of creates a creek that's really not there. There's no water moving there except when it rains. So anyway, but that's another argument. So then, and the whole point of this is think about this. This is 288 lineal feet. I'm talking about a site that's, 33 acres, and we have to, do all these steps just to even start the process, just to even put, a shovel in the ground. This is the kind of things you have to go through. Then, of course, we have to create part of our plans that we turn in, shows we have to create a detention pond to detain the water so that we don't hurt anybody downstream. And, of course, we have to detain not only our water, but the 4.5 acres of water that everybody else is dumping on us as well. And so, my problem with this, of course, is the multiple agencies for one little step in a large project. And, the solution, I think, would be to, have one agency that you could get this process done with, and then the other agencies would have to accept their authority or approval, so that you wouldn't have to go through all these steps. It's kind of ridiculous to have to jump through all these hoops with all these different agencies. You're doing the same thing. You're asking the same.
That's my question. Is if it's the same thing, I mean, why wouldn't one questionnaire work? Or are there actual differences on each? If it's federal or state or local, or each of the applications that you've got to go and fill out, is there different information that is being gathered?
It's a lot of the same information,
Okay.
but you have to put it in their format the way they want it. So you have to rearrange it and change it, and answer their questionnaires, answer their forms, and the way they want them. And they are looking at sometimes different issues. Like the Corps of Engineers, of course, they're looking at how it's going to disturb the lake. EP, I guess the EPD would be looking at, you're disturbing the banks of the stream, and that's what the city probably looks at as well, as the disturbance of the bank of the stream and how you're going to put that back. So, technically maybe a little bit different, but overall basically the same.
Okay. Well,
Any questions on that?
Yeah, one question.
Okay.
So when you say this disturbance of the stream, you're also talking about ditches. Are you having problems? Because I'm hearing that a lot of the DOT issues we're having is that the feds are declaring ditches streams also, and then they're subject to fish studies and some of the requirements. Are you finding that as well?
That happens. Absolutely.
So just regular old ditches or creeks
Yeah.
now. Okay.
Yeah, I mean in this situation it's a ditch, and I've walked up and down it several times, and when it's not raining, there's no water moving in there. I mean, there's a little bit of stagnant, few little pockets that hold water, but overall there's no movement of water. So, I mean, can you say it's a perennial stream and maybe come out there 6 months later and find maybe there's some water running? I don't know, but every time I've been down there, it doesn't run. And there's several. I've seen that happen in several locations, not just this one. But it gets on their map somehow, and one day it was on the map and showed it as a creek, so it's a perennial stream, and that's what they call it. So,
Continue, please.
okay. Number 4 is the energy code, and I understand somebody talked to you guys about this last week, so I'll try to be real quick and brief about this. But the first thing is, a lot of states. And by the way, our company builds in 12 states. A lot of states, mostly in the southeast, haven't even. By the way, this is the 2009 ICC. This is the International Energy Conservation Code. Most states are still in 2006 because nobody wanted to adopt this because, it puts more regulation on home building, which we don't need any right now. But just to give you an idea, this is the section that talks about new construction, residential construction, excuse me. The rest of the book is commercial and other items. So this is 10 pages, okay? That's all it is about residential, okay? So there's a couple things in here I don't really like a whole lot, but we could probably get through them, okay? But that wasn't good enough for the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia had to adopt their amendments. That's this. It's 36 pages of their amendments. And the biggest difference for us as home builders in the amendments is that in just the regular 2009 without the amendments, you're not required to do any testing. It's called a visible. They can do a visual inspection, and this is and the two items that we're talking about doing a visual inspection. It's the duct work and what they call a blower door test, or you inspect the house wrap, the envelope of the home. In the Georgia amendments, it requires that we do testing on that, and we can talk about how or why, but I mean, you guys have heard of lobbyists, right? Okay. But somehow it got in the amendments here that we have to do in the state of Georgia, and again, no other state does this. We have to do blower door test, and we have to do duct test on every home. So there's a little bit that we have to do as far as construction-wise to pass that, which is not a big deal. It's just an extra little foam insulation here and there, and we can pass the test. Not a huge deal, but the test itself costs in some places, $450. So why we need a test to do, on these homes that no other state requires, I have no clue. And we're building the homes so airtight, we have to have our HVAC systems have more and more outside air because we build them so airtight. It creates other problems. But that's we can debate about that. But anyway, I would ask that in this situation, sure, I'm ahead on my notes here. We don't need any additional cost. Home builders, I meant to start out with this, but saying that there's a few of us left. Most of them are dead, but the ones that are left are kind of on life support here, and we'd like to keep building homes, and having the state add more and more costs to things like this. I mean, it gets too burdensome, and it's passed on to our consumers. We can't compete with foreclosures. All we can do is hope that the values come back someday and we can compete again. But adding cost to new homes, it just makes no sense. If anything, you guys ought to be helping us the other way,
Yep.
Whatever that could be, but not adding more cost.
Vice Chairman Horn.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have to have special equipment to do these duct tightness tests and all that? How much is
You do.
that?
I don't.
Can you do it yourself? Didn't we have somebody that testified the other day that said you have to have a third party do that?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. In the amendments, it says you must have a third party. In this code, it says you can have a competent person or an inspector. Basically, the building inspector can make the call of who a competent person is to do a visual inspection. In the amendments, it says you must have a third party. Now, some counties have allowed an HVAC contractor who's actually gone through the course. So again, this is time, money that's spent just to learn and get certified to do the test. So some HVAC contractors that actually install the work, some inspectors have allowed them to do the inspection as well, but they have to buy the equipment and get certified.
Yeah, how much is that equipment? That was my original question. Is it?
I don't know.
Do you have the equipment, or do you get somebody else to do it?
Yeah, we hire a company to do it. Costs us about $450 a house.
That's just your cost.
That's our cost.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, to do the two test, the duct and the
the
blower
duct tightness
test.
test and okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And that's again not the first time we've heard that testimony. So,
Okay.
all right.
Any other questions? I'll go to the last item.
Yeah, we're gonna if you
And
will.
I'll be real quick on this one because I think I found out just some information before I walked in here from the Department of Consumer Affairs that you do have a law, so you can ignore the automatic fire sprinklers. You actually have a law that in the state of Georgia it is. He gave me the number even. I wrote it down. Anyway. OCGA 8-2-4 that does not require sprinkler systems in single-family homes. So I did find that out. But the other, so you have already addressed that issue,
Okay.
and he assured me that you're actually in 2006. I thought we were in 2009 in Georgia, but you're actually in 2006. So the pages I printed you there are actually out of the 2009 IRC, and you're actually in the 2006 IRC. So I don't want to confuse you there. 2009. For electrical, yeah. So you can ignore that fire. I think you guys have that taken care of. The other issue is that it'd be nice if the Department of Consumer Affairs, and I'll just address this with a broad stroke, as they review the 2012 code book, because that's the one they're going to adopt next, it'd be nice if they could involve more builders in the task force they say they have a task force that they're going to have to review the 2012. They're going to adopt that in 2014 is what he told me. And so it'd be nice if we had more builders on that committee so that we could address some of these issues. There's another issue here. I don't want to get too technical on you, but it's this section. It's actually out of 2009. It's actually in the 2012 code book as well that you're going to adopt in 2014. That says that any window that's over 6 feet off the ground on the outside and 2 feet within 2 feet of the floor on the inside, that we have to have guardrails on those windows. So, yeah. So it's called, we call it a guardian angel. And basically, there must have been a child that fell out a window somewhere, I guess, somewhere in the
A
country.
guardrail on a window?
A guardrail.
Now,
It has to be
aesthetically,
removable.
I'm not sure the homeowner would
Really? Yeah, I have the same concern. We're having to put them on in the state of Virginia right now. It's the only state that's requiring them, but that I know of.
And again, I'm sorry. This is coming through Georgia regulations.
This is the IRC, okay? This is the 2009 IRC, okay? It is not in the 2006.
Hold on a second. And please forgive my ignorance. I'm a
That's all right.
CPA, and many of these members on these boards are not home builders.
Sure.
IRC in this case means.
This is the International Residential Code Book, okay? It comes out every couple of years
And where does it come from?
from the ICC, which is the International Code Council. Yes, thank
I
you.
would say, so is what
most
they
states-
publish, is that what we adopt, or do we have an option of adopting?
You adopt this, and then you make amendments to it as you see fit. Amendments can be either way. It can be more restrictive or less restrictive. Does that make sense? Right now, this is 2009. You're in 2006. 2012 just came out. They're reviewing 2012, so the state of Georgia is going to jump from 2006 to the 2012 book. Okay, they're going to skip this one completely. Okay, but they're all very similar. Obviously, they don't change much. They're reviewing that now. You're not even going to adopt that till 2014. All I'm asking is that somehow the Department of Consumer Affairs is who does this, is get more builders involved instead of lobbyists and people that have other vested interest in, selling their little guardian angels or sprinkler systems inside residential homes. Get more builders involved in that review of the code so that we can not have any more burden on new home builders as far as costs go. I'm all for safety, and I don't want to see anybody fall out of a window, but putting these guardian angels on windows, it just doesn't make any sense. And it becomes an egress problem for if there's a fire. I think somebody's going to end up getting sued over it because one of these days there's going to be a fire inside that room where there's a child, and that child's not going to be able to get out the window because he's not going to be able to get that guardrail off and get out the window. So it becomes some other issues as well. But that's just don't want that added cost or burden to the home industry right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this ICC, International Code Council,
Yes.
so is this a federally put together council? Is this some kind of international organization that has been?
It's an international organization. It's independent, but it's adopted by almost every state.
Okay, so
It's accepted and is a standard that everybody accepts. Yes.
but it sounds like all these other rules are falling out of that. All the other rules we've just talked about that have been created, are they originating from this ICC?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to
Correct.
be a little more careful about adopting that, it sounds like.
Well, you have the option as a state to adopt it with amendments. So you can amend it. It just needs to be reviewed. So if you see issues, you have the power to amend that. So I know the state of North Carolina has amended both those sections I was talking about, the fire sprinklers and the the guardian angel on those windows. They've amended that. So
I want to make sure it's Department of Community Affairs, not Consumer Affairs, right? Yeah.
Department of Consumer Affairs,
Is it
right?
consumer or community? Community Affairs, okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'm pretty
I'm
sure
sorry.
that. All right. Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Well, thank you, Keith.
All right, thank you.
We
Appreciate
appreciate it, and I certainly got an education today. We have two guests that have signed up today, and again, I appreciate y'all being here. First is Mitchell Williams and Rick Northrop. Are y'all with the same company? Okay. Greenwood Ice Cream, and please, gentlemen, if you will, come up and tell the committee a little bit about yourselves and the regulations that you're having an issue with.
I guess I should start by telling you a little bit about what we do. We are a manufacturer and a distributor of ice cream for food service in the Southeast. We are headquartered here, and if I look at our company, sort of roughly a third of the employees are dealing with distribution, trucking, DOT.
Mm-hmm.
The other half deal with the manufacture of food. And actually I found it interesting to hear your first guest today. They were talking about the Department of Agriculture and some of the disconnects there. And like, we're regulated both by the FDA and the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and they both will do random inspections. But you do find that if you, and I'm a CPA as well, so I can appreciate it. So if you sort of back up from all the regulatory stuff, the issue really comes down to consumption of food and the health aspects of that. But you do find that the different fiefdoms within the government don't necessarily all have the same thresholds. And that was a little bit about what she was talking about earlier. Things that might not be allowed or be allowed in the dairy division or the Department of Ag may be okay in the restaurant. The dairy division in Georgia falls under what's called the pasteurized milk ordinance. And so you have, there are things that could be done in a restaurant that I couldn't do, for example. And so you do have sort of, yet the objective is the same, the public concern for the consumption of food. So, I know what she's talking about. And there are, if they were to try to mash up their standards, that they're not going to exactly mash up, for better or for worse. Who's right or who's wrong. I'm again regulated by dairy division, and I can tell you, for example, you could find a restaurant that makes their own ice cream, but they're not required to pasteurize that product, even though they combine cream and sugar, same things I do, but I'd be required to pasteurize and chart the pasteurization. So, and I'm sure that exists at a lot of different levels of food preparation, but again, begs the question, well, the goal is the same, why wouldn't the requirements be the same? And she was actually getting caught up in exactly that disconnect. Is he was being regulated by whoever inspects restaurant, and she was being regulated by the Department of Ag, and I think that exists at every level. And then you still have the disconnect, for example, in bordering states, you could hand fill like a 4-ounce cup and cap it. In Georgia, you're required to have, although they've eased up on this last 2 years, automated filling and capping. So you could have product coming into the state of Georgia from a bordering state that was under a less stringent requirement than I'd be on, even though it's being consumed by Georgia citizens. But I couldn't do the same thing and sell it here in the state in which it's being brought in. So you have a lot of those kind of issues. We're part of the NFIB. I wanted to mention that. I think they do a good job for us. And it's not, when you look at the regulatory environment, it's not and we're about 25 people, just so you
Okay.
have a concept of size. You know, it's not just sort of one thing, it's just the layering of effects, you know, between OSHA and all those things. Rick is going to talk about, and I'll sort of lay the groundwork for him, probably my biggest pet peeve of all the things that we deal with is on the, and this is a big cat to skin, you know, so I will go on record as saying this is not an easy fix. But probably my greatest disconnect is probably because I'm a CPA, is with the IFTA tax.
Is the what? I'm sorry.
The IFTA tax, do you guys know what that is?
No.
So if you run trucks in multiple states, and I'll lay out sort of the regulatory issue as I know it, and also the way they've answered it, I think is a really bad answer. You know, when we buy fuel, just like everybody, we pay a fuel tax at the pump.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know how many states are in the IFTA? Is it the southeastern states? They're all grouped together. So all the southeastern states have this concern because you know, tax is collected to maintain roads basically locally. So, and Rick will clear up anything I said wrong here. So you pay tax at the pump, okay, and the regulatory agencies, whoever they are, collect that tax. But that's not where the problem really lies. The concern is that if you're traveling interstate, is that somebody would buy fuel in South Carolina, you know, right before they enter the state, for whatever reason, either they're out of gas or it feels cheaper, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
pay the tax there, but then run on the Georgia highways, and thereby avoiding paying the tax where they, you know, where they consumed the Georgia roads. Well, the solution for the problem is complex that they've come up with. You literally have to track every truck, every mile in every state. And so it starts at the driver, keeping, you know, where he was for every state, and then it translates up to all this reporting and showing how much fuel tax you paid in each state. And invariably you end up writing a check for $2 just so the states can decide how they're going to divide up this kitty of money, you know, that they've collected in fuel tax. And this is a pretty big kitty. I mean, I'm not saying it's small dollars, but it would seem to me that there could, you know, the southeastern states could just as easily come up with, you know, some type of modeling that's equitable instead of having this whole, you know, huge burden that reporting burden on anybody who runs trucks basically interstate, because you have to have this special decal. It's called an IFTA sticker, and it just seems to me that it's just not a very expeditious way. You know, the money's been I paid the money when I bought the fuel at the pump, and we go through this huge, you know, all the way down to your driver, all the way up to management, to this filing, to just figure out that we owe $2, or, you know, basically so the states can decide how they want to divvy up the
Yeah.
funds. Did I explain it right? Okay.
A bunch of compliance issues, right? It's
It's
taken up.
It's just, I mean, I think the state need is real to you know, recover dollars
Yeah.
to maintain roads. It's just the question is,
How complex is the,
yeah,
is the,
it the, you know, the state is, who's ever administering this, it's obviously costing money to decide, you know, who gets how much in their bucket.
Mhm.
It's really what this is about, is who gets how much in their bucket, and there's a lot of expense being incurred both at the industry
so
level.
let me ask you, how long does it take you weekly, or I don't know what your reporting period is, but
Depends on how big your
long-
fleet
yeah.
is, for starters.
Well,
but
in your case, how long, or what is the process? Does it take an employee a day to do this? Does it take,
start with the driver time.
you know, what?
Depends how much they run. And
About 10 man hours.
And to comply about 10 man hours to collect the data, and then
that just
what is your reporting interval? Is it monthly?
Quarterly.
But
quarterly.
that's only for a fleet of probably 10 trucks, or 8, well, not even that many. How many is that?
Our fleet is 9.
9.
None.
So, and it would be there's no economies of scale
Yeah.
here. And so it just, again, seems an inefficient way to deal with that topic.
Okay.
But again, it deals with a consortium of states issue. It's not just something you guys could
Well,
resolve by yourselves.
we're a part of it. But,
Yeah, you signed on.
yeah. Representative Braddock has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this IPTA tax, is this a state level tax or federal? Because federal, when you buy gas at a gas station, we send that to the federal government and then they disperse it back to the states. So if it's a federal issue, I don't know why they would be doing that if we're already sending them what's being collected and it's being divvied up amongst the states.
Yes, I believe it is a federal issue, and then if they collect it, and then they divide it up based on the miles you run in each state, compared to the gallons that you purchase. You know, there are times when we travel through the state of South Carolina and never purchase fuel because they fuel when they leave the plant, and they might fuel in North Carolina and cross over into South Carolina, so that's why they do it.
But I thought
So that South Carolina can get their share of road use taxes.
I don't think they base what they send back to us on how many trucks are on our roads, but
Who do you
Well,
I know trucking as an industry is barely hanging on. I mean, a lot of them have gone out of business, and the ones that are left are, very much struggling. So to add this,
But when we write the check, who's it payable to?
Well, the check is payable to Georgia Department of Revenue.
Yeah, I think there is this may be, I guess maybe a compact between the states. And again, you may be
Okay.
right. I do understand the issue. I mean, the acronym I did not get. I will plead that I am not versed on the law and the details of what this program is. But I think it is. The state has a part in it. So
Yeah.
that may be something we want to look at with the. Obviously, if it affects you, probably all over-the-road trucks.
It doesn't even necessarily, I mean, we're not a common carrier.
Yeah.
We are just a manufacturer.
You're just a
We're running
manufacturer
our
with
own
the
fleet
delivery. With
to-
delivery.
we have customers in other states. So it's more far-reaching than you might think. It's a tricky thing.
Okay.
What else? You had a silly one with
Acceptable forms of payment. When you license a truck, back in 2011, they decided not to accept credit cards or company checks anymore.
Is this the Department of Revenue?
IRP,
this is for licensing.
the IRP tag office. Now it's just cashier's check or money order. And
Let me excuse me. I'm bad about it. IRP.
International Registration Plan. When you drive a truck over 32,000 pounds, you have to, and you cross state lines, you have to have an IRP tag. And
So is this a federal permit?
this is state.
It is a state. Okay. I think we may need to do some research on this issue. I'm not sure why the state would only.
Yeah, he went all the way down there, with a company check, and had to come all the way back to the plant. It's like,
I mean,
they
we-
don't take that.
We pay our income taxes with
and we pay every vendor,
corporate or
personal
personal
Yeah, I mean, it's
taxes.
crazy.
Checks.
Wasn't there one other thing related to the timing of the requirement
Well,
of
when you're licensing a vehicle, there's 3 different steps to it. Your ad valorem tax has to be paid to the county.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get your IRP tag from the IRP office, and of course IFTA. The ad valorem tax is not due for us until April, but the IRP tag application has to be in January. And if they get my application before we have paid our ad valorem tax, then they just shelve it, and I have to go chasing the tags. And then I run into the issue of all of a sudden they've changed acceptable forms of payment.
and you're in violation then if you haven't gotten.
Right.
It's like a catch-22.
So this is just the annual renewal?
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind? I don't know if you had prepared remarks, but would you mind going back and just sort of bullet pointing some of the issues that you've just made, especially the last one where you've talked about the process, the ad valorem, then the IRP. Did you say?
IRP.
And then if you pay one before you pay your ad valorem, they'll shelf it, and then there's a change in a.
Yeah, and then if they shelve your application, they don't even let you know. You've got to go chasing it.
Would you mind giving some bullet points and that way for the committee? I mean, we're in a information gathering mode here, and I know we're trying to take copious amounts of notes
Is there an
as you
email
guys.
we could send it to?
Well, I know that Kyle, and again, I'll appreciate NFIB. You are with a good group, so and they are working very closely with this committee on this issue.
Mr. Chairman, both of those are housed at Department of Revenue too. You can
Yes.
find them on the Department of Revenue website.
Okay.
Let me look and see if I had anything else that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else on there?
Hold on a second. Representative, we have two questions. Representative Braddock first.
Sure.
Ladies first.
Okay, so this is real quick. Thank you. So the ad valorem tax, you're not having the same issue with payments in the local cities and counties, just at the state level?
Just at the state level.
The payment
Law
forms
tax is
accepted?
paid with company check.
Okay, so that's just a state issue. Okay, thanks.
Representative Beverly.
I'm looking at the Georgia portal for trucking, which talks about IRP, and they say they accept cash, business, and personal checks, money orders, or credit cards. Is this an outdated? They just happened to just change the regulation.
It changed in 2011.
Okay, so that may be something.
We have an outdated.
Yeah, okay.
Good question. All right. Anything else, guys? I'm sure you could probably sit here all day and.
Yeah, the number one, I'll tell you what has gone well. You guys want to know? I think
What?
government in general, I think the online access to PDFs and documentation has been good. I'll tell you a silly one that I thought was sort of just salt in the wound. I had to get, for another state, they asked for a certificate of good standing. Or certificate, I think they call it different things, but you could just log in and print it out, but of course they wanted $10 to do it. It was like 2 seconds. It was just, really kind of thing. But for the state of North Carolina, they want, they call it in different states different things, but basically that you're a certificate of good standing from your state, and you go print it out. But it just, it's the little, I don't mind paying taxes. I'd just rather write one big check. It's all the little nickel and diming things that you find. But in general, I think the states and some of the counties have done well by moving resources to online, where you can either fine or file or get information or download returns. I think that's really been, I've been head of the company for 20 years, and it's one thing. In some sense, government has gotten easier.
Well, I appreciate that. Obviously, we want to make sure we know of some of the things or the direction that we're going in the right direction in. And certainly as CPAs, I know trying to online and do a lot of things that we can use technology to do that would cut down on our time, our paperwork is certainly, I believe, a step in the right direction. I just don't know if we've taken big enough steps yet in all the areas that we focus on. So
well, the IFTA one would, of 20 years of one that I just think it's, especially with the technology that we exist today, heck, you can, have a satellite track, can model how many trucks run in each state. I mean, it just seems like you could eliminate all of this completely, allocate the funds as the states agree, and be done with it. Instead we're, arguing who gets an extra nickel. And I can understand why the states do it, because some states may have lower fuel costs and drivers are going to buy it, in a different state. But it's just the Rube Goldberg we've created to allocate seems like it deserves addressing. Thank
all
you.
right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in your testimony. Is there anyone else in the audience? I'm sorry, we do have one more. Carl Lutgens? Legions, please, Carl. I apologize for.
No problem. You're not the first.
All right,
I don't have any special handouts or anything, and I'm probably not going to take as long as these other gentlemen have. Certainly, they've all had valid points. It's been interesting to come here and hear some of this. But I'm a civil engineer and own and operate a company where we do a lot of development plans. And we do a lot with the EPD. And the gentleman that was here before talking about the EPD and different regulations made a lot of good points. And some of those points, although I think that the EPD is here for a purpose, and I believe that some of the laws and regulations that we have are valid, and we do need them because we do need to protect. But sometimes I also feel like they may go overboard in some of their judgments or their interpretations. And I don't know if any of you have read or had a chance to read what they call as a general permit is the MPDES permit for stormwater discharge. Basically, all the erosion control laws are written around this permit. Even the design aspects are written around this permit, or done around this permit. And what that does is it basically tells you in developing or disturbing land what criteria you have to follow. And if you've ever tried to read it, it's not the easiest document to read. It's like other legislation. It's written by a lawyer, and a lot of people in the construction industry don't read.
A lawyer/engineer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They
Even
don't read.
more
That's right.
complicated.
They don't read legal. But one of the things that I want to do is sometimes in our industry it's gotten a lot better over the last 4 or 5 years. It's just because the construction has dropped off, and when I say it's gotten a lot better, it seems like I want to give a compliment because it seems like the EPD has become easier to work with. However, their regulations are still in place. What I mean by easier to work with is that they tend to want to work with you more, other than slap a fine or violation on you immediately. 5 or 6 years ago, it was immediate fines, and sometimes it was unreasonable, in my opinion. But the first item I want to talk about is in the MPDS permit, it is a general permit, and what that means is you file a piece of paper, and the piece of paper basically states your name, states the location of the construction activity. It is a stormwater permit, so it defines where you're discharging your stormwater. Basically, it's a statement: are you dumping it into a ditch, or are you dumping it into a trout stream? Where is it going? It's a very brief statement. Most of it is just check boxes and filling out, and then you basically sign your life away at the end of it, saying that if you violate this, or you could be assessed fines. The property owner and or the operator would be assessed fines, jail time, or some sort of remediation that is definitely going to cost a lot of money. And what we've seen is that these people that go down, they try to go down the right path, and they have a misfortune because of it rains, and we can't, and they've done their design correctly, but they still get fined, or they have to go overboard and do some sort of remediation, which costs a tremendous amount of money. That shuts the project down. It could bankrupt the company that's actually trying to do a project. So it's, in my opinion, I've got a couple. Let me turn this on. In my opinion, I think that it's hard to design for Mother Nature, and what they've done is they've taken Mother Nature and they've tried to define it and put it into a legal document, and then said, okay, I've got this book, that big green book that guy had, and said, hey, we're gonna design for Mother Nature. Well, that's impossible. You can't do that. You design on idealistic things, on averages, you make a lot of assumptions. These people go based off of what we say that will work based off of our guidelines that is published by the state of Georgia. Well, a lot of the enforcement doesn't recognize that. The enforcement recognizes that it's black and white. That if you you get some sedimentation off of your site, that you're in violation and you should be fined. Now that general permit does have language in there that says, hey, if you've done all these things and you try to remediate, then you're in violation. But it never says that whether or not you should or should not be fined. And there's been situations in the past where I think that some of these developers or builders or construction projects have done what they should have done, and they're still being fined. Also, at the end of this process, once you finish your construction, there's something called a notice of termination. It's how you terminate this NPDES permit. In terminating that permit, you must stabilize your entire site, and it means have grass growing or some other structural means that stabilizes the soil from eroding. And that's all great, but when you have a large site, sometimes it can become extremely difficult to stabilize 100%. There are structural practices that are in place that can continue to protect the environment outside of your site. However, what I've seen is that if you've just got a patch of grass that's not growing over here, the EPD won't terminate it, and you could be out there monitoring your site for months, years, depending on the weather. I mean, I've had a client a large industrial client, that stopped doing construction activity in 2008, and they still are unable to terminate their responsibilities under that permit today. And that's largely because of we've had drought, we've had cold weather, and every time the soil conditions on this site, a lot of it was rock or very poor acidic soils, and the bills that they have, and they're a pretty healthy company, so they've been able to sustain, but they've spent a lot more money than they should have, and there are a lot of people that can't afford to do that. So in general, if you take that company that can't afford that, they're out of business immediately. And so I don't quite know what the solution is, other than there's got to be some sort of reasoning behind, how long a guy, what his efforts have been. Maybe he documents his efforts, what his efforts have been, because there are soils out there, there are site conditions out there that simply just can't be vegetated. If you have a solid piece of rock, it can't be vegetated. I've had EPD's instructors say that, the inspectors tell me that, that rock is barren and it needs to have grass growing. So,
Are you serious?
I'm serious. And now they have become better and better to work with. This company now, after they don't quite have their NOT, but they are at the point now to where they are about to receive that. But this is 3 years down the road, and hundreds of thousands of dollars that they have spent, and when they budgeted for their project to begin with, that figure was not in there, and it stems back to the person reading this permit is black and white, and
there's no judgment. There's no judgment.
And I can see some there's no judgment and there's no accountability on the EPD. Have that person with some accountability. If he makes a bad judgment call, the company takes him to court and it gets overruled. Well, the company spent $50,000 going to court. The guy just gets an overruling and they get their paperwork, but he continued at the state's expense. the state pays for the attorney, I guess, general to fight these cases, and when they lose, nothing happens. And so I think that's a little bit of accountability that would be great, that I'd love to see involved in decision making before violations with fines come out.
I guess this wouldn't only pertain to EPD, but it could probably pertain to any host of agencies out there that there's some accountability, that if you've messed up in applying this, or there could be repercussions.
It's not just, instead of going to a site and trying to work a situation out, don't be so quick to slap a penalty or a fine on someone. Notify them that they have a violation, but don't penalize them. That's a big concern of mine. One of the other things, I want to keep moving through this because I could get stuck on an issue like that for a long time. In the MPDS permit, it requires, this is totally different from what we've just talked about, but it requires a 14-day waiting period. That once you file this general permit, you wait 14 days for them to deny it. Now, in my opinion, there's nothing on that form that is deniable. I mean, it's your name, it's the address, and it's where you're discharging your water. Prior to that, you, as an engineer, we submit all our plans to the NRCS. They review it, they approve it, and then they send it back to us with an approval letter. At that point, we submit for this notice of intent, and we have to wait 14 days. Well, I don't quite understand why we're getting an approval from the NRCS, which they're approving everything that general permit says. But then we have to wait 14 days after we've submitted that permit. My suggestion, in the 14 days, I think originally was enough time to review the permit, but also enough time to put it in the mail and receive it and send it back if there's an issue with it. I'd love to see some sort of electronic delivery method where we can knock that 14 days down to, say, 5 days. And that would be in the general permit, which gets reissued next July 13th. So you guys will have an opportunity to go back through the legislation and tweak things for that permit. It's every 5 years they reissue the permit through legislation. So I'd love to see the 14 days go down to about 5 days, whether if you hand deliver the permit to the office or through electronic means. Yeah, that would be it would help out. And I have a scenario which I could share with you that what's happened, but basically the 14-day waiting period, and one of the situations that happened this Christmas required it made people sit at home throughout the holidays instead of get paid. These are workers. Instead of being paid, they had to sit at home and wait 14 days. Well, once that was done with, this was it was the first of the year, and it's not stopped raining since then. So these guys have gone without a paycheck for a month and a half, where they're not in my office, but they're people on the job site in the construction industry, and that's a concern because there was no benefit to the 14-day waiting period, but yet there's a benefit to get these guys out working every day. Let's see. I want to go back to the fines for just a minute. In the past, when I have been involved and a developer or a construction company has been fined, I don't, no one seems to know how they are determining the amount of the fine. There's no published information that I can find that says, it says up to $50,000 a day or something, or if you discharge sediment into a stream, you can up to that amount. I had someone turn in a notice of termination. They thought their site was completely stabilized, looked fairly good, had even other people look at it, third party, and say, yeah, this is ready. Well, the EPD comes out and says, no, it's my opinion that it's not ready. We're fining you $4,000 for turning this piece of paper in prematurely. And no one seemed to know where the $4,000 came from. And again, they're a large enough company, they're not going to spend the money to fight it, so they pay it, and they move on. These types of fines, I believe it would be included in that permit that gets revamped. Should be some sort of fine structure that says, hey, if you adversely impact the environment, there's this fine. Not just because your silt fence has been knocked over on your site and yeah, some mud spilled over, but it didn't go anywhere. If you adversely impact, then maybe you should be fined from negligence. Not because we turned a piece of paper in too soon, or some silt fence was knocked down, but didn't hurt anybody or anything outside of us. And if we do get fined for things like that, or a negative impact, what is a rate structure? How are you determining how much to fine someone?
Well, my understanding is, not that I understand all of the EPD code and that part of the law. I had an issue where actually it was DOT had silted in a lake because of their construction, and but the issue of the fines. No, actually, it was a different issue. It was still EPD, but it was a different issue. And there are some areas in code where I think it talked about either minimums or maximums up to. So I would be curious. I mean, in this case, if the EPD said, "Well, you turned in a piece of paper way too early, we're going to fine you," that should be in code somewhere. That should be.
I've been unable to find that rate structure.
Did you ask for it? Did you ask EPD
We've asked the EPD several times, and they said they have a formula that they use to calculate this.
But did you ask them where in code do they have the authority?
I did not do that. The most I've ever gotten out of them, I've never gone down the road with them too far, because the more you aggravate them, the more they're going to come back at you. But so you're walking a tightrope sometimes.
I understand that.
All we've ever heard is that there's a minimum charge, and then of course there's a maximum, and then there's a formula that they plugged in. I've never seen the formula, but I would recommend that be a published document attached to that permit.
Well, what I would ask you is to try to get some kind of something for us so that we can narrow back in on the specific issue.
Okay.
I don't necessarily want to beat a dead horse with this issue with whoever your customer or landowner or developer is gone, and we don't necessarily need to bring up names, but if you could have some kind of documentation or a history of what happened, and maybe redact the pertinent information so that they can't be identified, then I think we could this committee can certainly ask the question of EPD to go back and show us either the authority under law or your formula and where you've got the authority to issue this.
Okay. That's pretty much it.
Well, we do have a question, so don't
Okay.
go anywhere. Representative Braddock.
Actually, my question isn't for you, but it's for somebody on this committee. So, or maybe you do know. So, what do they do with the fines? Because I do know that they're not protecting property with it. Because I've had a situation where we had a development that was negligent and dumped silt in our lake and killed our fish, but we had no recourse. And if they're fining people, we had no recourse. We had to actually sue the development because it was going to be very costly to dredge out our lake, and because it had a lot of silt. But we also have a neighbor who's been in a lawsuit, and there's a retention pond that does not work. It's been documented, and he's proven that it doesn't work, but they can't get the person that owns the retention pond to fix it. So we've got all this layering of regulation, but it's not solving the problems because we still have issues. And, you know, if someone's negligent, then, you know, they should be responsible for fixing the things that happen. But it's, I mean, it sounds like they're just levying arbitrary fines, and I'd like to know what they're doing with the money, because it should be, in my opinion, set somewhere to fix things that have been damaged as a result of negligence or, you know, problems.
Well, again, I don't know the answer to this. It's either put into the budget of the agency to help offset the cost, or some of it technically probably could go back to the general fund. I do not know that answer, but I would assume it's either one or two, or a combination of both, depending on the agency. Great question.
Well,
Maybe
we also
something-
had a situation where, you know, in addition to the silt, the watershed is like flooding property.
Yeah.
And we went to our county to get approvals to fix all of that, and they gave us permission, but then a neighbor, even though we were fixing it and it helped the drainage on everyone's property, they like to complain, and they were going to fine us like $50,000, and we had to get them involved with the state. Like, we had permission to do this, but it became a battle between the two, and I mean, we shouldn't have all this.
I'm not sure that these fines could go back to fix a particular problem. I may be wrong on this, but sometimes you get into an action against two private parties in which, you know, that's to be handled or litigated probably separately in a court of law. If I silt in your pond, kill your fish, then that's my responsibility. Probably not the state's, as far as
But if they're the
remuneration to
oversight.
you. I understand that, but that's a good question, Representative. I think that we can ask that question. I think this committee certainly ought to know that, because I would think that question would certainly apply against all agencies out there, especially any agency that does have the ability to issue fines. So not just EPD that we're talking about here. It could be any number of agencies.
I've never, to answer your question, I've never heard of the EPD using a fine to rectify a problem somewhere else.
So they're just.
I've
punitive
always
in
heard
nature. I mean,
I've heard it goes into the general fund, because some of the you know, we used to think, well, these guys are fining us so that they can have their job next year. You know, they're building a budget for themselves up. And they would always reassure us that no, that's not the case. It goes to a general fund.
well, and if it does, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
You shouldn't allow people within a department to
And I'm not
pad
saying
their
that,
individual.
And again, I'm not saying that we don't need some of these protections, some of these oversights. I just think that.
Well, if it was protecting it, that's one thing, but it's not. I mean, it's clearly not, because I know there are cases similar to ours, and, you know, the homeowner or the property owner who has the damage is not being protected. They have to spend their money and their resources to go and hire an attorney, and then if that builder or group of builders, you know, go out of business, then the homeowner's left holding the bag and paying the consequence for, you know, poorly managed silt fences or, you know, watershed or whatever it is that, you know, occurred that caused the problem. And then they don't have any recourse, yet the state and, you know, federal government or whoever's collecting all these fines is taking that money, and they're not using it to rectify the problem. So we're leaving, you know, individual property owners holding the bag, and that shouldn't be.
Well, Representative, again, I think it's a good question, and I think we need to understand from this committee as we go forward, and I think it could apply against all agencies that have the ability to fine. So maybe we can ask that question. Okay. Any other questions? Well, Carl, thank you. I appreciate you sticking around this late hour to do that. I appreciate the time, and thank you, committee, for showing up. I know there are a lot of other committee meetings going on, so thank the members for sticking with us. All right, thank you. We are adjourned to our next meeting is Wednesday, February the 22nd. My apologies. Next Wednesday, 1 to 4, right here, 506 LOB.